case that, well, they're not enforcing it against CAIR. You know, they made the designation, but they're not enforcing it, so you can't get an injunction.
Okay.
Right? That's their argument.
Did that work? I haven't followed the Texas.
Well, they're starting to show the ways in which they are enforcing it, you know, like underhandedly. And in Florida, they've obviously done kind of more to outwardly enforce it, but.
So is this state designation, is this kind of like a breaking of norms as well? Something that hadn't been done before?
I think they're trying to do, because I've heard that there's a couple other states where they believe it's coming. And I think there's a push for the federal government to do it.
You think at the state level in order to push the federal government to do something?
I think it's like signaling kind of thing. I don't think it's like, I think it's very clear that there's not a legal basis, but I think, pushing norms into different places.
But they've been, but Texas and Florida, they've been doing
They're
this
at the
with
forefront
everything. They are at the forefront
of the
all the
culture war.
university stuff,
Yeah.
all the social media stuff, and they whoop. So.
Yeah. But, they have all the money to do it.
Did you have a question?
I actually come from like a background where I didn't know about CAIR. I can maybe blame my expertise, which is I'm from the art department. So I know a lot about what's going on back and forth in the art world. But I'm curious, he said that CAIR and would not condemn Hamas, right? And then I was just Googling around because I'm trying to, see what's going on, and I see that there's this page on CAIR's website that's about American Jews and political power for some sort of workshop where they're going to workshop talking about all of the Jewish communities, things like ADL, AIPAC, that sort of stuff. So I was just curious, that is protected.
I would say I don't obviously know what you're looking at, but I can tell you, in having been in the community and worked with CAIR Florida works hand in hand with other communities. They are frequently partnering, like even if there's, protest activity or just community kind of learning events. They work with Jewish Voice for Peace, for example, other people in the community. So it's not like
Jewish Voice for Peace. But that one, that's not a
mainstream organization.
That's not I'm not going to say real, but that is one that only supports one point.
It's not like a selling point to the Jewish community.
Yeah, that's only one.
Well, my friends
point of view.
I think okay.
It's but that Jewish Voice for Peace is sort of like saying I have a Jewish friend, and it's just it's one little thing, and it's definitely not in the community, in the broad community where there's a lot of different opinions, and where we can talk about them. So that's just that's why the Jewish Voice for Peace seems like an off. I'm
not saying it. I'm saying in day to day.
Yeah.
It's these organizations all work together. The people know each other and work together. I don't think there's this some kind of separation based on whose religion is what I think the question was trying to suggest.
Oh, no, I was just curious because I was seeing that there was stuff where CAIR was commenting on,
about AIPAC. AIPAC certainly does try to donate significant funds that pushes an agenda.
There's a lot of Muslim countries that put in way, way, way more funds. Tons and tons of donors. The major donors at some of these campuses are from Muslim countries, and then people will say something about AIPAC, which is
that's an allegation. I don't know that there's actual evidence.
Professor Wasserman, I had a question for you. What do you think should have been the response to the campus protests and the encampments and things like that?
Don't destroy the buildings, stay within the grounds of, stay within the bounds of whatever campus rules there are for occupying buildings, overnight protests, deal with the consequences if you violate those. Don't follow people across campus and assault them, although I don't really think we have to, we shouldn't really have to tell people that. And the rest of it was
it legal?
It was, a lot of them violated various campus regulations that prohibit overnight camping, that prohibit occupying classrooms for things other than, class activities. So illegal, no. Violating campus regulations, a lot of it, yeah. And sort of the idea is, and so two ideas are at work there. One, the idea of civil disobedience is I'm going to break the law and suffer the consequences to expose, for some higher cause. And the other thing is the problem that for a really long time, probably my entire life, those campus regulations were kind of honored more in the breach than in the honoring. And so, they had, they were doing shanty towns and they were having overnight camping in the 1980s to protest nuclear weapons and apartheid in South Africa. And the campuses kind of, the universities kind of looked the other way. Because of the content because of both the content and sort of the permanence of it, that ceased to be an option. I think that's part of why things got as out of control as they did this time around. But yeah, were they violating the regulations? Yeah, absolutely. And was the school within its authority to break up the encampments? Yeah. Was the school also within its authority to try to negotiate its way out of it? Yeah. And that's also part of the long history of campuses doing that. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand the question you were asking.
I was just wondering, what is CAIR's position on Jewish organizations, and because I heard about the not condemning Hamas, which to me, it is a very obvious thing to do. So I was wondering what they thought about Jewish organizations,
But could we ask?
And then I looked for it in the Free Press. There was a page that's devoted to Jewish organizations. I was just wondering if there was a skirmish between CAIR and Jewish groups.
Yeah, and I'd actually follow up because I think Iqbal asked the question of how much of this is related to the Israel-Palestine situation, right? Which is, I think, the argument can be made that after October 7th, there's a heightened concern as to is there support being given from American organizations to Hamas, and that could be maybe what drove him to do this designation. It could be the Holy Land Foundation stuff that Iqbal was referring to back from 2009. But there is, I think one of in the popular view, the question about CAIR is how much of the organization that began was connected to some of what took place with the Holy Land Foundation, some of these unindicted co-conspirators. And the question that I have is, if indeed that's not the case, then it would make sense almost strategically for CAIR to come out and separate itself from the Israel-Palestine situation in order to avoid the designation. It's not to say that you don't have to have an opinion on Israel and Palestine, but Hamas, who orchestrated this October 7th massacre of all kinds of nationals, whoever was at this Nova festival, as well as all the Israelis that were killed, it would make sense almost to make a statement in order to make it clear to the American Muslim community that this is not the focal point of CAIR, that it's a greater issue of Muslim interest.
CAIR is a civil rights organization, right? So they protect the civil rights of individual Muslims when they are being attacked. And that can be for their speech. You know, CAIR is not, it doesn't make sense to ask that of CAIR, I think. That's, you know, and I don't think that there's any level of responding to those types of things or, you know, distancing yourself or being a good Muslim that will satisfy.
And the reason I say this is I think this is actually where the heterodox approach would come in place, because I think we can disagree here. I actually believe that the organization, the Council for American Islamic Relations, should be focused on American Islamic relations, which should sort of distance itself from any Palestinian terrorist organization for the sake of the connection that the Palestinian terrorist organization has towards American interests.
Can I say, as an American Muslim, just like anybody else who's an American, whatever religion, they are entitled to the same First Amendment rights as everyone else, right? I want to know that my kids, if they are at school and someone asks where you're from and they say Palestine because they're Palestinian, that they're not going to be attacked. And that's, you know, and we need organizations like CAIR that will come in when they are inappropriately attacked to say, hey, you can't do this. You know, just like every other minority.
Yeah, and I think any minority can say that if somebody were to try to attack them based on their identity, then we should be protecting that. I think the issue is the death to America chants that come from Hamas would lead somebody who's an American Islamist or an American Muslim to say, I would separate myself from anybody who's going to challenge my secondary identity of American, right? There's billions of Muslims in the world. Not all of the Muslim countries are maybe as connected to the designation of the foreign terrorist organizations, perhaps the issues with the Palestine-Israel situation.
I think like your ask, like the ask is like CAIR should disassociate, otherwise they're terrorists, and then they should be subject to this kind of designation that the governor doesn't have the authority to do. I mean, that's like a lot of leaps.
I think
I think
that,
it's just making them a little more, you know, it makes it putting them out there, right? I mean, it kind of says like, well, why not? And it raises questions.
but we
That's
don't,
what I think.
but I think that the answer that you gave or to your question earlier is exactly right. We don't ask that of any
That's
other
not true,
group.
though. We ask
And
that of every group.
We,
Yeah.
not at the threat of the government designating them as a foreign terrorist organization.
Well,
As a form of criticism, yeah, and then you can debate whether it's a stupid form of criticism, but not to the degree of imposing formal government sanctions, and that's really where I think what we're talking about here crosses over. But the government is not no one is stipulate for a moment that bad stuff happened in the war in Gaza. No one is asking the ADL to say, things went a little bit too far. And certainly no one is threatening to impose legal consequences on the ADL for its failure to do, or no one's going to associate the ADL with that. The Irish American, I don't know what the Irish group is, for failure to dissociate themselves with the IRA. I think the point is I think well taken. We don't ask that.
For the Islamic community, but in the American Islamic community, you have the question of the organizations that we're talking about, Hamas, have a threat to Americans. If ADL had a threat, in terms of Israel doing something we're talking about something in the Middle East. I mean, I'm more concerned about American interests, and we think about, does Hamas have an interest in death to America, and perhaps some of the reasoning for what DeSantis does, and I don't know the reasoning. That's probably where we all run into a little bit of where's the evidence,
Yeah.
where's the evidence that CAIR is actually engaged in.
Oh yeah, no, reasoning versus evidence, those are two different things. I can pretty much figure out what the reasoning behind this is. The evidence for it is another story.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, CAIR did say that the Israeli military was a terrorist organization, and so I think that's kind of where there's a little bit of smoke. There might be something involved with that because they, and they're attacking AIPAC and things like that. So because of their support of Israel. So that's where I'm just like, they are inserting themselves into this, including just like on their website calling it a genocide.
One
So-
of these
and-
things are not free speech,
Yeah.
though. That's,
I was
that's
gonna say.
the-
So I'll stipulate,
Do
no
Muslims
offense.
get free
I will,
speech or no? That's-
no offense,
that's
I will
confusing.
stipulate, they are an anti-Semitic organization. So
Okay.
what?
Okay.
I'll accept it, I
But
will
are they
completely
But that's a hate
accept
group.
that.
Are they
I don't,
Yeah.
I'll accept that too, I don't care. You
I
can
think-
be anti-American, you can be anti-Semitic, the whole idea is that unless you are posing, unless what you are saying is imposing, is intended to impose, is either threatening somebody directly face to face, or, and I'm talking like, I am going to take out my gun and shoot you right now, or is intended and likely to cause imminent harm, then everything that we're talking about is protected. Death to America, anything that's anti-Semitic, including the counter, all Muslims are terrorists. It's all protected.
Okay.
And it all should be
And the
protected.
KKK is protected.
Completely.
Yes. I just think
Nazis in Skokie.
because it is a hate group if it is anti-Semitic,
But
so
there's
to
no
just
such,
call it
but again,
hate
that
group, trying to call
designation,
it like a civil rights group. when
that
it's just hate
designation
group.
does not exist. And I will tell you, if you want to see consider the Southern Poverty Law Center, which identifies itself as a civil rights group and is considered by certain communities, certain conservative communities, as a hate group. And so the idea that the two are mutually exclusive, no, it all depends on who's talking. But yeah, Nazis can march in Skokie, the KKK can march, Hamas can chant death to Israel, death to America, death to whoever they want to, whatever, the supporters of the IRA can chant death to the king. It's all protected, and it all should be protected, unless it gets to the point that it is like about to cause harm. And that is a really, really forgiving. The standard we have under the First Amendment is incredibly forgiving as to what is going to constitute imminent, incitement of imminent harm.
I think that goes to your point, like where, will the line shift? And I think it is. I think there's enough, and on both sides of the political spectrum, enough sort of violence and things that occur that might cause that line to shift.
But that's where I go back to the point that the public doesn't really believe in free speech. The courts do, at least so far. And so I haven't seen any indication that a court is going to abandon, or really that the Supreme Court, because that's where it have to come from, that the Supreme Court is going to abandon that definition of incitement. I haven't seen it.
So if the case is a losing case, then so this is just kind of this FTO designation is kind of, is it virtue signaling? What
Say
is
that again?
So if this CAIR case is essentially going to lose in court,
No, governments do lots of things knowing that they're gonna lose in court. Maybe I assume that some lawyer in there somewhere is saying that, that the Attorney General thinks they can win. I don't happen to agree with them.
Right.
But I'm not, unfortunately, ultimately the judge, and so I don't know how it's gonna come out. I don't think it should win, at least on the information I've seen.
Okay.
Somebody within the government may have a different view, and the government brings cases that it knows it's gonna lose all the time.
And can I tell you also functionally, like, why would you bring a case against an organization? Stop it from fundraising.
Yeah.
Drain its resources, because now they need to respond, in court.
Yeah,
and
people
use
don't want to donate
and
to an
tie up
organization.
their resources in court, as the bigger party. Maybe engage in discovery, find out who's donating to them in the state of Florida, even just regular people.
That would be my thought. Is this actually a campaign to get more evidence on CAIR now that,
I don't know if it's more evidence or if it's,
or more time wasted on that?
But note how it works. It's not the state initiating litigation. It's the state imposed designation, and then CAIR's the one that brought the litigation. That's how it, obviously how it has to happen, but CAIR is the one that triggered the litigation.
So I have a question. Part of it is a kind of like in any legal profession, you have kind of precedents and you have kind of entire, jurisprudence that develops in terms of how you understand cases. So the same thing is the case with freedom of speech. How important are organizations outside the judicial system in terms of ensuring freedom of speech, like organizations like FIRE and some of these organizations? Are they essential for the protection of freedom of speech, or can the freedom of speech, as it's understood currently, be maintained within the existing judicial
No,
system?
I think outside of the judiciary, it's important that there be education. I was kind of glib when I said nobody really believes in free speech. It all depends on whether they agree with the speaker. It would be nice to have a broader appreciation for speech, and so groups that provide that education are really important. Groups that, one of the things that FIRE and the ACLU do well is they try to nip things like this designation in the bud before it happens. They send letters to government officials and say, okay, you're about to do X, Y, and Z. That probably violates the First Amendment. Here's why you may want to reconsider what you're doing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
You think one last thing? When it comes to a college campus, obviously a state university is government funded versus a private university. Do you think there will be or should be or sort of a movement away from connecting the university to like the government laws and whatnot, as far as like consequences for things go, or protections for that matter? Because like a lot of if a protest, for example, crosses the line at a private university versus a public university, there's sometimes different consequences. And I also think with regards to organizations and their connection to the universities, like the protections are different at public and private, but it's still students going to school and
Yeah, so private universities aren't bound by the First Amendment as a legal matter, but most universities sort of make a private commitment to abide by the First Amendment through the student handbook, through their faculty handbook, and so they kind of contractually agree to protect free speech on campus.
Not just even the organizations, for example, like University of Miami, they can say, "Oh, students just the housing, we just don't want them here."
Right, but what I'm saying, they could do that, but what they have done is they have voluntarily agreed to be bound by First Amendment principles. as if they were a public university. And so they do that in their student handbook, they do that in their faculty handbook, and so they sort of agree to abide by, they agree to abide by those principles. Could they change their mind? Yeah, absolutely. But right now, what happens in practice, what happens in private schools, what happens in public schools, because most private schools, at least the ones that want to be taken seriously as national institutions, voluntarily take on that responsibility.
I do see a difference though in, like, when it comes to protests, for example, and like what is allowed. Just even University of Miami versus FIU, for example, there is a difference.
I mean, I don't know what UM's regulations are.
So what do you mean, like it's more permissive or it's more restricted in UM?
It's more restricted.
Okay.
Just even who's allowed to come on campus, what outside organizations, what things that are happening, what student groups are sort of allowed.
Yeah, no, and they can,
For better or worse, I'm not saying,
and they can do that.
Yeah.
Most schools at least attempt to abide. Again, I don't know University of Miami's speech regulations, but most schools at least try to keep it roughly equivalent to the First Amendment.
And in fact, one of our meetings that we had with the Heterodox Academy was to discuss Jonathan Rauch's The Constitution of Knowledge, which argued that you can view knowledge in the same framework that we view the U.S. Constitution for law, that you have these checks and balances. And the idea is that we should have some checks and balances between the major knowledge-producing institutions, which are the academic institutions, but also the law practice and the government and the media. And so I'm not sure that we want that separation as much as we actually want them to learn how to work together.
Right. No, that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, you look at a school like here, and the administrative roles are, the state government has a hand in that in a way that you wouldn't maybe see at a private school. So there's even more connection to the state government, than what we've seen in the past.
But we've also seen a mess nationally with sort of the interactions between our government and institutions. So there's pros and cons, I think, to it for sure.
No, I'm not saying it's good. Either way.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
That's our second goodbye.
That's good. This is the afterwork, Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor. Can you take a picture?
Sure.
Or would you mind a picture?
No.
Okay.
Do you want me to use your phone?
Yeah.